Tonight, somewhere in the world, someone is lighting a candle for the dead. They may not know why. They may call it tradition or religion or simply something their family has always done. But the gesture itself, the flame, the offering, the deliberate act of communicating with whoever is no longer here, is not a product of any single culture. It is not the invention of any single religion. It is something far older than any of those things. Every human civilization that has ever existed invented a god of the dead. Every single one. Not a god of life, not a god of the sun or the harvest or the sea, though those appeared too. But always, without exception, a specific powerful deity whose entire purpose was to govern what happened to you after you stopped breathing. The Egyptians had Osiris. The Greeks had Hades. The Aztecs had Mictlantecutli. The Norse had Hel. The Mesopotamians had Ereshkigal. The Hindus had Yama. The Japanese had Izanami. The Celts had Aran. Across continents that never communicated, across thousands of years, across cultures so different, they shared almost nothing. They all built the same door. They all placed the same kind of figure behind it. This is not a coincidence, and it is not simply because humans are afraid of death. The real answer goes much deeper than that, and it starts with a problem your ancestors faced that no other animal on Earth had to solve. Your ancestors knew they were going to die, not in the vague biological sense that every organism eventually stops functioning. They knew it consciously. They could picture it. They could watch someone they loved stop breathing and understand, in that moment, that the same thing was coming for them. Paleoanthropologist Ian Tattersall has argued that this awareness, what he calls the cognitive capacity for self-reflection, emerged relatively recently in human evolution, somewhere in the last 100,000 years. And when it arrived, it did not arrive quietly. It arrived as a crisis. Think about what that awareness actually means in practical terms. You are a member of a small tribe. You depend on cooperation to survive. Every person around you is a resource, a hunter, a gatherer, a caregiver, a knowledge keeper. And now, overlaid on top of every interaction you have with every one of those people is the knowledge that they will disappear, that you will disappear, that everything you are building together is temporary in a way that no other animal comprehends. Other animals grieve. Elephants return to the bones of their dead. Chimpanzees carry deceased infants for days. Dolphins have been observed staying near the bodies of their dead companions. But no other animal builds a theology around it. No other animal constructs an entire cosmological system to explain where the dead go and who is in charge of them when they get there. Why did humans do this? Anthropologist Ernest Becker spent his career trying to answer that question. In his landmark work, he argued that the awareness of death is so psychologically destabilizing, so fundamentally incompatible with the functioning of a conscious, planning, future-oriented mind, that every human culture in history has developed what he called immortality projects, systems of belief, symbol, and meaning designed to place the individual inside a story that continues after their physical death. The god of the dead was not just a religious figure. The god of the dead was a psychological technology, a tool for making the unbearable bearable. But there is a second layer to this that goes beyond individual psychology, and it has to do with the specific social problem that death creates inside a tribe. When someone in a small ancient group died, they did not just stop existing, they stopped being predictable. And in a world where survival depended on knowing exactly who was around you, who could be trusted, who owed you what, a person who had died was suddenly in an entirely new and deeply ambiguous category. Were they gone? Were they watching? Could they be angered? Could they help? The relationship did not end cleanly. It transformed into something undefined. And undefined relationships are dangerous in a social species that runs on the precise management of obligation, loyalty, and reciprocity. The god of the dead solved this problem. By placing the dead inside a specific governed realm with a specific ruler and specific rules, ancient humans transformed the terrifying ambiguity of death into something manageable. The dead were somewhere. They were under someone's authority. They could be communicated with through specific rituals. They had specific needs, offerings, prayers, ceremonies that the living could meet. The relationship continued, but on terms that everyone understood. Archaeologist and cognitive scientist David Lewis Williams has studied the origins of religious belief across multiple ancient cultures and found consistent evidence that the earliest humans were deeply preoccupied not with the living world, but with the boundary between the living and the dead. Cave paintings, burial sites, ritual objects. Again and again, the archaeological record shows humans investing extraordinary energy not in depicting the animals they hunted or the landscapes they lived in, but in marking and managing the threshold where the living became the dead. This threshold was not just spiritual, it was social, it was political. In many ancient cultures, the authority of the living chief or king derived directly from their claimed relationship with the dead. To govern the living, you had to control the dead. The god of the dead was not just a religious figure. In many civilizations, the ruler was the god of the dead's representative on earth, or in some cases, was believed to become the god of the dead themselves upon dying. Power in the world of the living was inseparable from power over the world of the dead. Consider what this meant in practice. If you wanted to challenge the authority of a ruler, you were not just challenging their military or political power. You were challenging their connection to every ancestor who had ever lived. You were challenging the entire cosmological order. The god of the dead was, among other things, the ultimate enforcer of the social hierarchy, because the hierarchy extended beyond death itself. This is why nearly every god of the dead in every culture shares certain characteristics that transcend the specific myths built around them. They are almost never fully evil. They are judges. They weigh, measure, evaluate. Osiris weighs the heart against a feather. Yama consults his records. Hades enforces the rules of his realm with cold impartiality. The god of the dead is not a monster. The god of the dead is an administrator. Because what the dead needed, from the perspective of the living, was not a destroyer, but a manager. Someone to keep them organized, accounted for, and properly separate from the world of the living. And here is the part that should stop you for a moment. You still do this. Not in the same form, but the underlying psychological architecture is identical. When someone you love dies, your brain does not immediately accept their absence. Neuroscientist Mary Frances O'Connor, who studies the neuroscience of grief at the University of Arizona, has found that the brain continues to model the dead person as present, continues to predict their behavior, anticipate their responses, reach for the phone to call them, for months and sometimes years after death. The neural pathways built around that person do not dissolve. They persist, and they keep generating predictions about a person who is no longer there to confirm or deny them. This is not a malfunction. This is the same cognitive system that your ancestors used to justify the god of the dead. The dead person is not gone from your internal model of the world. They are in an ambiguous state, still present in the machinery of your expectations, still capable in your brain's internal simulation of approving or disapproving of your choices, still watching in some functional neurological sense, even after they have stopped breathing. You light the candle because something in you is still modeling the relationship, still managing the threshold, still doing, in your own private way, exactly what every human civilization before you did when they built a throne for the god of the dead and placed offerings before it. The god of the dead was never really about death. It was about the refusal, the deep, ancient, neurologically hardwired refusal to let the relationship end cleanly. Every civilization that has ever existed looked at the dead and could not fully let them go. They built entire worlds to put them in. They invented powerful beings to govern those worlds. They created elaborate rituals to keep the connection alive across the boundary. Tonight, somewhere in the world, someone is lighting a candle for the dead. And without knowing it, they are doing exactly what the first humans did when they realized that the people they loved were gone. But not somehow entirely gone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The candle is still burning. It has been burning for 100,000 years.